Hello, I'm Wendy Atkinson, Programming Manager here at the Chan Center for the Performing Arts at UBC. While we're gathered virtually for this conversation, I'd like to acknowledge that the land where the Chan Center sits and where my guests and I are today is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Joining me today at the Chan Center are George Belliveau and Chris Cook. Thank you both for being here. And we're joined virtually by Brendan, who's zooming in from Ontario. George Belliveau is a professor and head in the Department of Language and Literacy Education at UBC. His research focuses on research-based theatre, where he leads an interdisciplinary cluster of faculty members, artists, and community members in mobilizing knowledge using theatre. Chris Cook is a theatre artist and therapist currently completing a PhD in counseling psychology, exploring research-based theatre and mental health. He also coordinates the research-based theatre cluster at UBC. Brendan McLeod is an acclaimed writer, musician, and spoken word artist who wowed a sold-out audience at the Chan Center back in 2016 with his monologue, Brain, and whose brand new work, Ridge, which we'll be discussing today, premieres at chancenter.com on November 11th. Universities benefit from having a population of people working on new ideas all the time. Scientists, historians, artists, researchers from across disciplines. This makes cross-collaboration not only possible, but constantly happening in unexpected ways, which is why we're all lucky to have this conversation today. Brendan, I was hoping you could start off by telling us about the genesis of Ridge and how you came to know George and Chris.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for sticking with Ridge through the pandemic and everything that's happened. So I met George through the Chan Center when I was there in 2016 doing Brain, and we were doing, there was an event, there was kind of an ancillary event to Brain happening at the Peter Wall Institute, and we just started talking, and he told me about his work in theater with veterans specifically, and I think that's originally either I talked to him about Ridge at that time, or that is actually what made me think about doing Ridge. But anyways, from that discussion, he after we exchanged emails and stuff, he eventually ended up hooking me up with Chris, who dramaturged Ridge, and here we are.
So George and Chris, can you tell us about your own backgrounds, your work at UBC, and how you played a role in the development of Ridge?
Sure, I'll start. So I'm a professor at the university, but I try to also continue the art form that I trained in theater. So part of the bridging in my work is bringing some of the scholarly work into an aesthetic realm of theater. So research-based theater is this hybrid model of looking at data. It could be personal stories, narratives, and thinking about how can that be brought to life using dramatic aesthetics and different forms. So when Brendan did the monologue Brain, which was just a brilliant piece in terms of not only his personal narrative, but it was also that he had explored what are all the consequences of living with this particular condition. So there was a sense of research, but he brought it into a very aesthetic storytelling manner. So that was very exciting when I saw that piece. And Chris.
And I am a PhD student here at UBC right now, and my background as a theater artist includes acting and playwriting. And when I came back to do my graduate work at UBC, I met George, and I was really taken by research-based theater and the possibilities that it offered to combine art with a research methodology in an academic setting in the university. So I've really focused my graduate work on research-based theater. And George, I guess it was in 2018, said that he had met someone, Brendan, who was working on a one-person show about Vimy Ridge, and that I should meet with this person. And Brendan and I got together here in Vancouver and talked about the script and did a read-through, and I was really taken with the work that he was doing. And that was kind of the beginning of our relationship.
So Brendan, were there specific elements of research that George and Chris were involved in that inspired your work on Ridge? And what was the connection like in the beginning?
Yeah, so at the very beginning, I recall emailing George and giving him a more like when originally you don't have any. If you're me, you don't have any money when you're talking about just doing an original one-person show. So it's just a blank slate. And so I was applying to different funding bodies and even talking to the Chan about helping support the beginning of it. And I sent him the support material. He looked it over, just also the angles I was taking. And just so that correspondence, which went over the course of months, was really helpful in just kind of getting me on the right track, like talking to someone who was an expert, or as an expert as I knew in that field, and who could he just would look it over, and he agreed with the angles, and he would comment and support, and then same with the Chan. And so that's how like the original research got started. As for what happened after that, like I can't remember. I haven't researched this hard since I did a master's degree in philosophy, and that was when I was like 20 years old and had way more energy. So the year of research is a bit of a blur. And then Chris was more of after the fact, after the script was kind of up on its feet, and by up on its feet, I mean kind of stumbling barely on its feet. He started working with me to help the themes that had emerged from the script, like how to make them come alive on stage and pop, and to get me to slow down when I'm talking, which I think I successfully did during this video, finally, during Ridge, the filming of it, not this video.
So, Chris, Brendan's touched on this, but maybe you want to elaborate. You joined on as dramaturge, and what did that mean for the project?
Well, Brendan came in when I joined. Brendan had created a script which was really rooted in research already, and I think how I was conceptualizing my role as dramaturge in this process was as a companion to Brendan, really trying to focus on the story that he wanted to tell about this historical event that is so meaningful in Canadian history. And I think what I was really focusing on throughout the dramaturgy is how the research could be alongside Brendan's voice and Brendan's own journey and reflection on what the research meant to him as an artist and as a person.
Can I maybe add here too that in this latest iteration, which audience members you're going to be able to witness, or you have already witnessed this play, is this beautiful bridge between this mammoth amount of research that Brendan did, and he talks about his passion for Vimy, of Pierre Berton's book, which encompasses a version of history. But then he went out and reached and turned every rock to try to find what else can I find out through books, through actually physical visits. But what is just so phenomenal about this piece is that what Chris just mentioned is that relationship of how does he encounter history. And I think that's also Brendan's performance background, which allows that the script is just as useful as someone who's going to. The script is a combination of him in bringing life to that particular script. So his presence is always present in the in Ridge.
And that leads to the next question. It's a nice segue. You're all coming in with an interest in the topic, in World War I and veterans, but coming from very different backgrounds, very different ways of approaching a project. What with the interest in the history of it. So the way you conduct your research is different, and I'm wondering if each of you can touch on how it might be gathering sources and information, how it might be different to prepare a theater piece or to prepare a PhD dissertation or an article or other kinds of research, and maybe talk about those different approaches.
World War I is a very expansive topic. So luckily by framing it, like research-wise, by framing it in terms of one battle, I could pretty much be exhaustive in reading everything that's been written about Vimy Ridge. I mean, all of the major books about Vimy Ridge, and then most of the scholarly articles I can find. The internet's a whole other thing, but it's not as curated. So there's also things on the internet. So, and then there's topics that branch off of that, but I kept that as my central component. And actually, it was this Pierre Berton. It was actually a Pierre Berton tactic. He, when he wanted to write his book about the North, he said, I read his autobiography before. I read his autobiography, and he said that he approached his editor and he said that he'd read every book on that topic, and these are the holes he wanted to fill. And so I thought that that was a really good kind of instructive, like a good methodology to approach. I just wanted to read everything I could on Vimy Ridge, and then I would know the scope of what we were missing, and then I could speak to that. So until I knew that, I had to read everything that I could get my hands on about it.
And how did you curate that reading? Because as you said, if you're going on the internet, it's huge. But how did you curate? How did you decide what would be relevant for your research?
Well, I mean, you start at the library and you put in Vimy Ridge, and
See where it goes.
I mean, I know that sounds a little weird, but there's only, I don't know, a dozen books that are centered on Vimy Ridge in the Toronto Public Library. So you read all those, and then, you get from those, if you've missed any central text from there, you'll get from the footnotes of all of those, you'll know who you've missed and who are the heavyweights that might fill you in on these subjects. And then, as well as World War I in general, you have to read like some central text for that, some people for that. But you just start there, and it's kind of like it gives you a little bit of a yellow brick road. And then the internet, if you can't find anything on like a scholarly work, you can kind of, triple source the internet. And I feel like if you triple source the internet, like if you source it in Wikipedia and 2 books, or Wikipedia and 2 other websites that don't seem written by crackpots, then you're good to go.
So Chris, I imagine that your process is maybe there's some overlap or some similarities. So maybe if you want to talk next about the process of your research for your dissertation, are there overlaps with what Brendan's approaching?
There are totally overlaps. I don't know if I do that last one as much, the whole internet find the 3 things, but I think there are other overlaps that really work. And I think from the script of Ridge, what I really admire about the script is the triangulation that's present in the script, which is a fancy research term for talking about the different sources that Brendan has brought into the script, right? There are popular songs from the day alongside historical accounts, alongside contemporary news reports, all of these different ways of crisscrossing and making sure that the data that Brendan is putting forward is fully fleshed out by these diverse sources. And that's definitely something that I strive to do in my own research as a PhD student. I think that, of course, my focus is on mental health. And when talking about veterans or the military, I look at things like trauma and PTSD in my own work. So thinking about those firsthand accounts that are present in the script is really meaningful for me, and that's crossover between the type of research that I do and the script that Ridge has become now.
And George, how does that fit into the way you do research? Because and with veterans that you've done with theater work, so how do you approach developing a new work or working with the community? Are there overlaps with what Brendan is doing, or are there just other things that you're doing that you want to add as well?
Well, I think at the core of what Brendan did, and Chris articulated the 3 things at play, and maybe even more than that at play. I think Brendan had many things at play, and I think with the kind of research that we're doing in research-based theaters, that we're always trying to honor, if it's a historical-based piece, we've got to honor what has been already discovered, but then we're always trying to tease out the essence of it so that it doesn't become a history textbook on stage. So, but then there are always other elements at play, whether it's interviews with living veterans, in our case, when we're working with veterans, and so that their stories are there, juxtaposed with other artifacts. And I think it's the interplay of those that make a piece of work come alive. And I think with Ridge, it's that you have some verbatim, so there's a sense of, oh, this is actually based on this, but then there's a translation of an understanding of a particular phenomena. And I think the other success of this particular piece is the not going into a heroic narrative of Canadians. There's always that underlying story, and great pieces of theater are always keeping things in check. And so it allows us to realize that when, in this case, when people left the military and they were stuck in England for a while. What was that all about? What kind of victory parade? We see the images of these veterans in Hollywood coming home with, these parades. No parades necessarily with the Canadians after the World War I. So to me, those are some of the key ingredients of a piece of research-based theater.
And Brendan, I'm curious about the development, like when you did the monologue Brain, it was literally a monologue. There was no music in it, but you are a musician. And I'm wondering, at what point, did you always imagine music in Ridge? And if not, what made you go in that direction? How did the musical element of Ridge develop?
Yeah, it's really funny to think of what I thought Ridge was going to be and now to be premiering it the way it turned out, because the way I originally conceived it was just me on a stage alone talking, very similar to Brain. And I think originally I brought the songs in as a formal component. I kind of had a couple of drafts in, and the material is obviously very heavy. And I read the script, which at that point was about 6 hours long, so it was way too long. That was the first problem. But the second problem was, this is just too heavy to get people to go through this voyage with you unless you lighten the journey a bit. And you can't lighten the journey contextually because you have to speak to what happened. And so I started thinking about songs as something that could have a lot of emotional weight and heft and lyrical weight and heft, but would come with a little bit of a lighter approach to the audience. They'd be able to hear melody. And so that's what originally drew me to the World War I songs of soldiers. And I actually wasn't, though that was later in my research, and I wasn't expecting to be as blown away by the lyrics of the songs as I was. But when I read the lyrics of the songs, I was all in. Like, I just thought they were incredible, resigned, cutting, humorous, satirical, sardonic, heartbreaking lyrics. And then I went on YouTube or whatever to listen to the original recordings. And I think I came up against that problem that I've been having with history all the time, is that the form of the songs, so the recordings or the way in which they're recording or the arrangements of the time, automatically emotionally distance you from the lyrics themselves. And so what I wanted to do was capitalize on the immediacy of theater, the here and now, and the amazingness of those lyrics. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll just rewrite the melodies and the melodies and the songs and make them sound contemporary, but the lyrics will not be changed. They'll be with the lyrics of the soldiers. So that's how the song started, and then the band got in, but we'll probably get to that eventually. But that's how the songs originally came in.
Well, actually, since you've started, how did the band get in?
Well, when we were on tour, I think we were on tour, in Germany is where really, when the band was on tour in Germany, because it's just, as I say in the piece, it's all over the landscape of Germany, so many war monuments and memorials and museums. And of course, in Germany, it's a lot of World War I, not World War II. World War II, not to German soldiers. There's no monuments practically to World War II German soldiers, just World War I soldiers. And so it just got us thinking about war, how different cultures remember, what that does to generations after, what happened to people at the time, and started rereading Vimy to the band, with the band. We started talking. I showed them the songs. I showed them what I'd been working on. And, it wasn't I wasn't pushing it on them. We just started talking about it. We started playing the songs, and the band really, really got into it. They were just, they turned out as passionate as I was about the songs. So then we started working on the songs all together, and then that's how they got involved.
So we can't, we're coming close to the end of the conversation, but we can't end the conversation without mentioning the significant pivot that you had to do for Ridge. Because right when the restrictions on gatherings happened, about 10 days before, the restrictions came in, and we were supposed to be presenting Ridge here at the Chan Center, and it was supposed to be a live production before a live audience in our Black Box Theater. So it's now 6 months later, and a lot of hard work later, a lot of changes, and it's been reimagined from a live theater piece to a feature film, which it's turned into a feature film that will be shown at the Pacific Cinematheque in Vancouver. What has that pivot been like for you?
Incredible. It's been one of the most fulfilling artistic experiences of my life. It's totally by accident, but that doesn't mean it can be any less meaningful. And I've been really lucky to have it's become so collaborative because not only did the band get involved, like George and Chris got involved, and then the band got involved, and then the Chan was involved, and then now all of the visual people were involved, all of the audio people were involved, all the lighting technicians were involved, and you're in a collaborative process with 20, 30 people all at the same time. And so you're just really at the mercy of everyone being into the project, because if they're not, those elements of those projects will kind of fall by the wayside. And so it's just really lucky, and just speaks to, I think, the Chan for bringing along good people. But the teams were really, really amazing. Every single one of them at their jobs, just so dedicated and incredibly proficient and passionate. So I have never been collaborating with so many people at the same time that we're all, working so well together, and just it was great.
So George and Chris, a question for both of you, maybe starting with George. What are you working on now? What are your next projects? And what do you hope to see happen next in terms of arts-based approaches to mental health care?
Well, I think to pick up on what Brendan was just saying, the pivoting, a lot of our current projects that we're undertaking at UBC, which were all live theater pieces, usually with communities, different communities, be it veterans, people living with disabilities. We were looking at a piece on residential school survivor narratives, one on water in small BC communities, Indigenous communities. All of those have had to also pivot to an online format. And as Brendan said, some of them have been some happy coincidences that have lifted the projects into new ways that we hadn't thought about. So we are working on the pivoting. I think probably the freshest piece right now that I'm working on is inspired partially by the work of Brendan and Tetsuro Shigematsu, who tell stories of something that really matters to them and that they're passionate about. Tetsuro tells the story of 1 hour photo of a local, the local development of that particular, I guess I'm going to call it a store. And but it's his relationship with the story, as Brendan's relationship with Vimy, that really is powerful. So I'm looking at language, my own language journey right now, and I'm developing a piece on growing up. I grew up completely in French in Acadia, and in a Mi'kmaq environment as well. And but what's the shifting in language? So that's what I'm working on right now.
And Chris?
I think in terms of arts-based mental health, what I'm excited about is what Brendan was talking about in terms of the group coming together collaboratively to really pivot this piece, and the power that those collaborative working relationships create. So in my own work, in what I'm focusing on, I'm hoping to explore theater and collaborative theater creation as a mental health intervention itself, and the process of creating pieces and sharing pieces in public spaces as an ongoing growth process that can contribute to mental well-being. And I think overall, we're seeing a shift, I would say, in the way that the arts are being accessed as a tool for mental health. I'm very excited by that shift. I think we could see a lot of it building on the horizon, and my prediction that is sort of over the next decade, it's going to become more and more accessible. And pieces like Brain and Ridge are kind of shedding light on the different ways that people could share stories, both personal and historical, that resonate with different mental health journeys.
And this is a question for all three of you. Just as we're winding up, I'm curious to know which each one of you hopes the audiences will take away from the performance of Ridge. And maybe starting with you, Brendan.
I guess a few things. It's an interesting show to watch during the pandemic because Ridge speaks of the experiences of young soldiers by virtue of that being part of a marginalized community at that time. And the vulnerabilities they're exposed to in a crisis by people of power. And I think in that there's many, many parallels to the structural inequalities that the pandemic has been taking advantage of and exploiting in Canadian society and across the world. So I think that's one interesting thing. I hope that the visual tie-ins with the Chan Center are interesting to people, because it's very it was a happenstance, but I really owe it to the visual crew for pointing out all of the not on over the head metaphors, but just the bunker-like environments and the empty environments that can speak to some of the emotions behind the piece. And I guess thirdly, as far as the text and stuff, I just we think of terms of remembrance. The mythology of remembrance. When I speak about this piece, I've been doing some press for it recently, and I find that most people who are interested in it off the jump are, white males. And we have 3 white males speaking about this piece right now. And that is a problem of lots of things, but it's also a problem, it's mainly a problem of mythology, because there are lots of queer people that were in war. There were lots of people who were not white who were in war. There were females in war. So it's just that the leading mythology has been speaking to a certain segment of the population. And I'm a white man, and I understand that. And I would like to call in those white men who are interested in this subject and speak to all of the other ways that we can read history that includes all of the people who are not usually spoken about in that history. And for all Canadians to think of the ways in which we constantly frame history and contemporary events in these ways that only speaks to a certain segment of the demographic, and to try to open that up and be more open-minded with our readings of history and contemporary politics.
Great, thank you. And George, do you want to address that question? What are you hoping audiences might take away?
Well, it's hard to follow Brendan's passionate points about that, which are beautiful. I think it's a human story, and I think people are going to connect with the story, and there's a patriotism to it. There's a sadness. There's humor, but there's also a sense of pride, and so I think they're going to connect with that. And maybe more widely, this collaboration between Brendan, the musicians, the technicians, and the Chan Center. I hope people will also see the interdisciplinarity of this piece. And UBC, we pride ourselves in trying to break boundaries. Brendan talked about the Peter Wall Institute, which is a collaboration that the Chan Center has collaborated with. Hopefully, we'll continue to build on those strengths of learning from different areas, so that we can not necessarily solve, but at least address so-called big world issues like the one that we're facing right now. You can't go at it from one direction. So hopefully that will come out of this piece.
And Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. I think that I also hope that the audience takes a couple of things away. I think that one question that we kept on coming back to in our dramaturgy sessions is this research in history. What does it mean to you? And that was a question that we explored in terms of what does it mean to Brendan. But I hope that the audience, through the experience of watching this piece, is invited to ask that question as well. What does this mean to them? And how does it impact them now? And I also hope they leave the theater humming the songs. I was humming one of the songs on my way here.
And that brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you for participating, all 3 of you, for George Belliveau, Chris Cook, and Brendan in Ontario. And thank you to everyone who is listening to this discussion. You can find more information on Ridge on the Chan Center's website, chancenter.com. Thank you.